We are gonna do a real quick little brain break because we've been sitting for so long, and I know I'm driving nuts, and I know we had a bit of a change, and I want to make sure that we do support that when we move into the breakouts next in our break, that on the floor is a bunch of piece of paper with a whole bunch of different smiles, and those smiles can be emojis, they can be smiles of your favorite people, they can be smiles like those really cute smiles you get from dogs sometimes that are really, really funky, or cats if you're a cat person, right? So whatever kind of smiles you like, imagine them on pieces of paper on the floor. And I want you to bend over if you are willing and able. And I want you to do this with opposite hands so that we're crossing our midline. And I want you to imagine, pick up the smile, and you can fold it nicely or crumple it up. But I want you to think about throwing it across your body into a smiling bin, right? So where do the smiles go? They go into more smiles because emotions are contagious, right? As Mona was saying. So cross over, grab a smile, crunch it, throw it, take your other hand, bend over, grab a smile, crunch it, throw it into the bin, right? And do that as many times as you need to be able to feel good or have a positive movement going into break, just in case there was any stress over the breakout sessions in our upcoming break. So I'm going to let Tim kind of tell us what we're doing next.
Fantastic.
And we'll have our afternoon speaker for today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back from our breakout rooms. I have the pleasure again to introduce Dr. Emily King, who she kind of came to my awareness during the pandemic. I follow her on Facebook, and I absolutely have loved everything she has to say about this pandemic and the way she supports families and professionals. So I'm excited for her talk. Dr. Emily King is a licensed psychologist and health service provider in private practice in Raleigh, North Carolina. She has 20 years experience working with children and adolescents with anxiety, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder. Dr. King has received her Ph.D. in school psychology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and worked as a school psychologist in Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District in Houston, Texas, before returning home to Raleigh in 2010. 2010. She's passionate about helping parents embrace their parenting journey by taking care of their own mental health and finding the best fit of services for their child's growth and happiness. Perfect talk for today, a perfect speaker for this time. Dr. King is also a mother of 2 energetic boys, aged 7 and 12 years old. She launched the Parenting on Your Own Path website in 2020, where she shares online resources beyond her psychology practices. She has a blog that you can follow. She also has an online course for parents and digital social stories available at the Story Shop. She's been quoted in the Washington Post and has written for parents.com, motherly.com, themighty.com, and has been a guest on the Holderness Family podcast, the Parenting ADHD podcast, the Wired Differently podcast, and Building Psychology Strengths podcast. You can also find her on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and I would highly recommend you follow her. She's got some great information out there and is very active on social media. So without further ado, Dr. Emily King.
Thank you so much, Connie. It's so great to be here. I am a public education nerd. I love talking to teachers. I love everything about public education. I am a public education graduate, went to UNC, taught in public schools in Texas, and then on my way back to moving back to North Carolina, I knew that there are some limitations to what school psychologists can do in the schools here. So I decided to do private practice with I do a lot of talks in schools and churches and just to be able to reach more people. So I do a lot of therapy, which I'm only really able to do that mostly in private practice, but I specialize in autism, anxiety, and ADHD. I also know Mona. I'm DIR floor time trained through Perfectum. She's absolutely amazing. I'm so excited that y'all got to hear her earlier. And yes, her book is awesome. I heard some people talking about it earlier before we came on. It is light bulb moment. I think all educators should read it. I think her work and Ross Green's work are going to shift the thinking of how we think about behaviors in children moving forward. So I'm very passionate about that. I think of all the roles, ironically, the thing I have never been is a teacher. So I went straight into graduate school knowing that I wanted to be a school psychologist and a child psychologist right after undergrad. So disclaimer at the beginning, I literally do not know what it's like to make connections with 20 to 30 kids at a time, to feel the pressures of a principal and a parent and an IEP and following all of that. But what I do know is counseling teachers, collaborating with teachers, consulting teachers, and in my work as a school psychologist, being that fly on the wall to help teachers do what you do best, which is really complex and really underappreciated. And so I'm a huge advocate for all teachers. And I hope that my perspective as a former school psychologist, but also now psychologist in private practice who does testing and therapy, as well as my now 13-year-old, he was 12 when I wrote that bio, but my 13-year-old has autism and has had an IEP since he was 4. So I've been on all sides of the IEP table. I have needed to be a parent, even though I have the knowledge of maybe what a school psychologist is reviewing with me. I've needed to be the parent and stay in my role. I'll talk about that in this talk about, even though I feel like I have something to add in terms of a strategy as a psychologist. So I hope that my perspective helps everyone just kind of think about all the different hats everyone is wearing at any given time, and how we've got to give each other grace and assume that everyone's doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. And that is especially true right now. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get my PowerPoint up.
Emily, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that we will be having a question and answer
Yes.
after Dr. Emily's talk, and I will be monitoring the chat just like I did during our talk with Mona Delahook, and we'll be sharing the questions at the end and kind of moderating that discussion. Mm-hmm. So throw your questions as you have them into the chat. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to keep my face up here so it's not like I'm just talking and you can't see me. Okay, so this talk is all about working collaboratively with parents and families. I know that we have parents in the audience, we have educators of all kinds, and we have clinicians who are out in the community. And I've been in all of these roles in terms of, at least as a school psychologist, as an educator in public schools. And there's not, one person that is going to solve all of this, or, as working in groups, one person can't carry the whole load. I know we've all felt that at certain times. So I'm hoping that this talk just kind of brings it all together. And even if you are a parent, and not a teacher, it gives you some perspective of the teacher and vice versa. Okay, so let's see here. There we go. So when we're thinking about the dynamic between the relationship of the parent, the teacher, and the child, it is so incredibly complex and dynamic. And the reason is because we are all bringing our own experiences to the table. And I'm going to sprinkle that throughout what I talk about today. We are all bringing previous school experiences, previous work experiences, maybe even previous experiences about a child who this student reminds us of. And it is hard to keep those in check while also doing what's best for this child, or keep our emotions in check. So the reason though this is so incredibly important is because our kids are watching us. They're watching how we communicate. They're watching our kindness. They're watching how we deal with conflict. And eventually we want our kids to be able, usually sometimes in middle school, to join their IEP team. And what are we modeling for them? And it's so important for us to figure this out, and to, even if we're working with an adversarial situation, speaking up and saying, this is how we can work together in a productive way if we have a colleague or a parent who is really struggling to be productive with the relations that are going on. So the reason that these relationships are so incredibly complex is because educators, teachers, administrators, school staff of all kind, this is our job. We are trained to do what we know best. We are trained to be, it's data driven. We are trained to follow the data to say this is working or this is not working. And we have to be careful sometimes to not be void of, all the qualitative information of the relationship. So we got to balance those two things. The additional stressor for many educators is that in public education, we're all working within a limited system of funding. Yes, it would be amazing to have all the money in the world to be doing whatever we need for a student, but usually we do come to some sort of crossroads with what we feel like could be best for a student and maybe what our funds have to offer. And that is a super tricky position to be in, as much as we're following IDEA and we're following, different staffing decisions, but especially this year, I don't know how things are going in your state, but I'm seeing a lot of teacher turnover where we are, and staffing is incredibly hard this year because people are worried about being in school buildings. People are worried about just sustaining this remote learning stuff. So there are all of these behind the scenes stressors that education is going through that parents may not be aware of. And so when parents are not aware of that, they sometimes can come across as asking too much, and teachers may feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do that too. So we all just have to assume that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources that they have. So parents are coming to the table, usually influenced not only by their own school situation, but also by potentially previous school situations for their child. And so, as we all know, school is hard for many kids with special needs. And so children may have been in a variety of school situations. Different IEP teams are going to give teachers and parents different experiences. And all of that emotional kind of baggage that we bring along, we're bringing that to the table just as much as the other person. And so our job as parents is to communicate our children's skills and what we feel like they need to succeed and the support they need. Now, that may not always be possible given constraints that public schools have. And that's the tricky balance. So because this is so complex, we have to trust each other. So that is going to be my my main overwhelming statement today is about trust, which I'll get to in a minute. So how this is looking different in 2020 is that COVID is shining a light on all the things that schools do. And this as educators, but I feel like our society is waking up to this, of all the things schools do that are not related to learning. You could certainly argue that these things are related to learning, like children need to be, fed and nourished before they can pay attention to learning. However, in our country, we have, equated childcare to public schooling, safety during the day to public schooling, and before and after programs, nutrition. So when schools closed this year, it was so obvious how much public educators were doing and how much was being run through our school buildings. So I am hopeful that this will change some perspectives, maybe with funding, maybe with legislators understanding what is and isn't working if we are relying on certain services being funneled through schools. I just think that it could hopefully bring some awareness to how much teachers are doing, and goodness, please, can we pay everyone more? Could that be a part of the equation? Okay, so let's talk about trust. So this is my favorite quote about trust. The opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. So we all think of anxiety as being like this revved up, panicky, freak out feeling. And we think the opposite of that is calm. Well, you can actually be pretty calm and still be fairly worried. So it's important to think, okay, why are we anxious? We're anxious because I don't believe or trust or have faith in the fact that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. So when this is so true this year, especially. So previous to this year, students and children look to their grown-ups to solve problems. When we have a problem, we usually can remain calm if we trust that we know what to do. Children look to us, and the perfect example would be like breaking a bone. Children know that my kids know I'm not an orthopedist, but they trust that I'm going to know what to do if they break a bone. This is COVID. This is pandemic. No one living has lived through this. we don't know what to do for probably the first time in their lives. And so that's why our self-care is so important this year. We need the energy to problem solve things right and left. This is why we're all so tired, is because nothing is automated this year. So we have been making decisions about school, about work, about play dates, about should I go to the, drive to this person's house? I mean, simple things that you would not even have thought about before. We are expending energy doing those things. So it's incredibly important for us to take care of ourselves so we can then help our children solve these problems. And that goes for all of our relationships. So we have to think through what people first know about a system and about people's jobs in education to then figure out what they trust, because whatever they don't understand, they have to put their faith in us about. So many parents actually don't fully understand the system of special education or the system that teachers and administrators work within. So all they have left over is to trust you. So that's why it is so important to build this relationship of trust. If teachers don't fully understand the student, they completely have to rely on the parent. I mean, we first go to the parent to be the one to tell us what they're seeing at home with the child. And then it's true that we may see something totally different in the classroom, which is not because the parent is wrong. It's just because they're seeing something different because there's a different set of circumstances, probably a different time of day with a different set of resources, and that will change behaviors and what a child looks like in different settings. And then each party, the teacher and the parent, they must trust each other to make decisions for the student. And this gets really dicey when one of them thinks the other one is responsible for something that they're not. And so thinking through your relationships or things that may be triggering you as I talk, I think that this is a very heated topic because we're all bringing experiences to the table. We've all been kind of confronted by maybe a parent that's upset about something, or a teacher that's bringing concerns to us and it's making us panic about our child's development. Those are all very emotionally loaded experiences. So it's possible that something I say today will trigger you in a way. And I just challenge you to think through, okay, what's that about? Just get curious about it and try not to shut it down. To get curious about it and say, okay, what's that about? Was the parent asking me to do something and I can't believe they think that's my responsibility? Or I feel like it's the parent's responsibility to X, Y, and Z, and I can't believe they're not doing that. So just thinking through those things can be really helpful. Okay, so here I'm going to give you two examples of where these scenarios are completely influenced by trust. So let's say a parent is getting limited communication from the teacher. Oh, I see a typo there. So if a parent doesn't hear from a teacher, but they trust them, there's some sort of establishment of trust already earlier in the school year. They might think, oh, no news is good news. She'll let me know if there's a concern, and you trust she's got it. You trust that you can go along your day and the teacher has got it. But if a parent does not trust a teacher, they might think, I am so frustrated, he's not communicating. How am I going to know what my kid is doing, right? So same scenario, but different outcomes based on projections of what we think is going to happen. Another is also very emotionally loaded, and this is when teachers are first sharing concerns that they see about a child's development or learning. So and this is the one I see the most, it's just so important. As a psychologist who often, especially in private practice right now, outside of the school setting, parents will come to me because a teacher is concerned. They may or may not trust that teacher, and they're kind of wanting my take on it. Whether it's because of my credentials, they trust me more, I'm not sure, but they're kind of wanting that second opinion of, is this something we need to be concerned about? Parents start to get scared when their child has a learning or developmental concern. And so when people are scared, they act in all kinds of ways. And so if a parent already trusts the teacher earlier that year, and the teacher then comes to them with concerns about a child's development, they're likely to believe him or her, and they're going to work together, figure it out, and the child's going to get support probably faster. If a parent doesn't trust a teacher, they're going to question it. They're going to say, oh, I don't know. I'm going to rationalize that he's a boy, or, whatever excuses parents have to not fully admit, and there's a lot of denial in the process of grief that comes through. I talk about this actually in my course, if anyone is interested, that there's a process of grief that parents go through when they're accepting their child has autism or that their child has any disability. And if parents are stuck in that denial part of grief, it's really hard for them to hear educators, and it's really hard for them to trust anyone. But if there's trust already there, the child will likely get help faster. And that's why trust is just so incredibly important to build. Okay, so this is where I'll give you the disclaimer that some of these sentences may trigger you. So we all get very kind of testy when it comes to like, just staying in our lane with whether we're parents or educators. Basically, no one likes being told how to do their job, right? No one likes being told that they know more than we do about our kid. So we've got to honor that and know that. However, I preach this to parents as well of like, let the teacher stay in their lane. Let the administrator stay in his or her lane. Like, they're trained to do this. They know what they're talking about. So as members of the child's team, we just all need to assume that everyone's doing the best they can in each situation. There's so much in special education, especially, that has to remain confidential. And this is one of the things that I remind parents of all the time. The teacher can't tell you all the things they've done that day. They can't tell you if, they just dealt with a suicidal student and then over here they had a parent melting down about something and then they had to go teach this class and then funding got cut for something. Many of these situations are confidential, and teachers, of course, are reaching out to each other for support, but it would be, better if, easier for parents to understand and have some compassion if parents knew more. But it's just, we're set up with confidentiality and we want to respect that. So I remind parents all the time, you just may not know what that teacher has done that day. And same goes for the parent. Now, parents can, of course, share more with educators about, let's say there's a job loss in the family, or there's some sort of grief or death in the family, or just COVID in general has affected everything. And we'll talk about that in a second. We just have to assume that the parent is doing the best that they can. So, this goes for the adults in the room with the resources that they have, which we all would do better with more resources, right? And we just may not have all that we need to do the best we can. So when we start to question each other, skills or perspective, this is when we start upsetting each other. And so if you can think back to any scenarios in your mind about where there was some conflict and the collaboration just broke down, it's usually because someone questioned someone else and that person felt defensive. So we must be able to trust each other so that the student can see that everyone is on the same team. And we all need more resources and less judgment. And that's, of course, not something we're always in control over with the resources. But what we are seeing this year is so obvious with the lack of resources. So I joke this year of like, where is our lane? So we've got parents helping with remote learning. We've got teachers almost nearly doing backflips, trying to maintain a curriculum that was designed for 2019 and past. So I've been saying over and over this year, try not to go into this school year with 2020 goals. I've been saying this to parents so that we adjust our expectations. I mean, with 2019 goals, this is 2020. Our resources are depleted. We may not even have the financial resources we had. We certainly are more stressed. We are doing way more things than we were before. The tricky spot I'm seeing that's the most stressful is for teachers, because you're being asked to teach the same curriculum and the same amount of curriculum in a different way. And in my opinion, that is unfair and it's hard and it's just something that's happening. And so I see you and I know that this is so hard. So this year, we all need obviously more resources than judgment. And it's just a year where we could really be practicing grace for everyone. Okay, so how do we build these relationships? We know that this trust is important. We know that, our kids are watching us. This is just, it's just so important. So what I often say, and I know many of you are not in a carpool line right now, but We can't build relationships. We can't at least build trusting relationships in a carpool line. It is often that the only interaction parents and teachers get sometimes are maybe one conference a year, carpool line, and maybe a social event through the PTA. Now, I know that by default, our IEP teams are meeting potentially more often or for longer periods of time, but still, if things are going well, there may just be that one annual IEP meeting that year. So we do have to make an effort. You know, we have to first know each other to even trust each other. And I preach this to parents a lot because teachers are trained to do this already. Teachers have open houses, in non-COVID times have home visits, or now we're doing virtual, maybe one-on-one Zoom meets, visiting the park. You know, teachers know the importance of this. So I do a lot of coaching with parents on how can they show up. And not just showing up when there's a concern, showing up all the time. So this may be getting involved with the PTA. This may be, even if you don't have the time to do that, it could be donating resources to the school. I actually was a PTA president for my son's school in elementary school. And it was a magnet school where not a lot of families lived in the neighborhood. And in where we live in Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, there are a lot of technology jobs in the Research Triangle. And so there are a lot of tech savvy parents here. And there were some parents who would say, well, I'll do the PTA website. And they never really stepped foot in the school building. Their child would come on the bus, but they were helping the PTA behind the scenes. So things like that, to think outside the box of what do you have to offer and how can you show up even virtually to show teachers and administrators that you're a part of this school community, because without saying it, you're saying, I support what you do. I trust what you do during the day. Here are some skills that I have to help build this school community. So, this is obviously goes without saying, but one special education teacher I know would say it truly takes a team. And when parents and teachers are on the same page and work together, it obviously creates much more success. I think we can all agree. So in thinking about strategies for parents to communicate, these are some of the things that I coach parents on that I've found successful both in my work as school psychologist or as a parent or as just a PTA leader and collaborating with school. But I also think it's helpful for teachers to hear this because these could be some things you suggest to parents, like the best way to communicate with me is this way. So we all want to remind parents, and I often remind parents and myself, we've got to have boundaries, especially during COVID, because our phones and our computer are with us all the time. It seems like we're remote learning from wherever. So what are the best times and the best ways to reach out to each other? We want to respect everyone's family time right now. The second point is probably the most important. Not much gets accomplished when we try to communicate when we're upset. I actually just always give the example of an upset child. You know, us trying to talk to an upset child, we all know as educators that a child's brain has been hijacked by that emotion, and so has ours if we are upset at a situation. And maybe we're not angry, maybe we're sad because a teacher is leaving, maybe we're scared because funding got cut. You know, we don't know the plan. We don't trust that we have a way to solve this. And so we need to give ourselves space and time to process that so we can therefore organize our thoughts. So what's happening, and what, if anyone's read Dan Siegel's work, you know, the emotional brain is flipping and taking over the thinking brain. And when our thinking brain is hijacked basically by our emotional brain, we can't effectively communicate because we can't organize our thoughts. We're overwhelmed. It's just never really the best way to communicate. So I always say to parents, I know you want to go in there guns blazing and say something to get it for effect, but we've never really wanted to collaborate with someone who was upset. It's just really uncomfortable. And so there are better ways in terms of just everyone giving themselves time to come, you know, a day to process information and then come back to the table with what, again, would effectively be best for the child. So I usually say this statement to parents: it's a collaborative partnership, but the project is your kid. The project is the student, and don't let your emotions hijack the project. You know, it's not something we would let happen in a job situation. We would keep our cool in a job situation. The project is your student, and what is more important than that? So when a parent comes across as accusatory when you express a concern or share data, it makes me more hesitant to reach out. And I think that's really, really true of all humans. You know, we shut down and go into back in our turtle shell and protective mode when we feel attacked or accused of something, and all we're trying to do is do our best. So we just have to assume competence for everyone and the need for more resources. Okay, so for teachers, some things that can be helpful when communicating are to really understand that parents could be getting triggered in some of these situations. And some parents will have triggers related to their own schooling. For instance, if their generation, I mean, I do think we are getting so much better in terms of how we're managing behavior, but I've certainly worked with parents with ADHD, for instance, or a parent who had to, you know, grew up in a trauma situation, and then had acting out behaviors. And then no one ended up, you know, seeing that as trauma and reactive, and therefore they would get in trouble, and they probably have a negative school experience. And so parents can be triggered by the principal. Let's go to the principal's office, or I need to talk to the teacher. That could be an anxiety-provoking situation for them. The other thing I see is when kids have been to multiple schools or multiple school experiences, usually they have changed school settings because something wasn't working. So there's something negative and emotional probably in that family's history that is triggering some, you know, resistance or conflict in a conversation. So I always encourage teachers to get curious. Like if you see some sort of just, you know, defensive or just angry actions or words from a parent, just kind of get curious about, I wonder what happened, or maybe even ask if you feel like you have that trusting relationship with them. Like, I feel like you're getting overwhelmed by this. Is there something that this is, you know, reminding you of? And so that you can clarify, this is different. You know, you understand their kid and this is a different experience. You could be the new experience for this family. You could be the first positive experience for this family. So just think about it that way. I always put in here the importance of administration, just because as you know, if you're an educator listening to this, your principal, your assistant principal sets the tone and also sets the tone for support. So like I said before, with the confidentiality of schools, there are things that we can't share, that you can't share with parents. And so it's incredibly hard to try to communicate what you can and can't do without saying all the things you also did that day. So it's incredibly important for you to feel supported by your school and your administrator. So any administrators listening to this know that I have seen such great support and success with schools where the administrator is hearing all of these perspectives and supporting teachers to then communicate effectively with parents. This is another one that I get pretty passionate about and that I see a lot as a psychologist. So this is tends to have to do with testing. So when a child is evaluated and there's a diagnosis, especially if a family is doing that through private practice and then sharing or not sharing the report with school. I am usually the one that is encouraging parents to not withhold any information, because I know how incredibly important it is for you to do your job to know everything about a child. But I also want educators to know that parents are scared. And I think that it goes back to their experiences. I think it goes back to their experiences maybe of themselves. Not long ago, special education was, you know, probably 100% of a negative connotation. I mean, I think we've come so far in understanding that, you know, in my mind, special education is just about giving kids access to learning, but we're still evolving as a culture. So just, you know, parents in their 30s and 40s are going to have memories of special education in the 1980s, and it probably wasn't very positive for them. And so parents are scared that their child will be unfairly treated if they're labeled. And it goes so far sometimes that children aren't getting tested because parents don't want a label on their child. So I do a lot of work and counseling with parents to get them there to say, you know, your child will be misunderstood, probably, if we're just guessing as to their skills, as to not just academically, but socially, attention wise, what are they capable of? We need to know so that we're not expecting too much, because as we all know, when we expect too much, we get behavior. If the expectation is way higher than the skill level, we're going to get behavior. So I work a lot to coach parents on that. And it's something that you could probably also do as teachers to say, you know, we will not judge your child based on last year's teacher's opinion or any type of assumption of a label. You know, I always say to educators and parents, when someone says my child has autism, that should be the first thing that starts the conversation, not the last thing. The next question should be, well, tell me about them. Because as we know, no one is the same, and especially no one on the spectrum is the same. But just because a child has that classification on their IEP, that's the beginning of, oh, let's dig in and see what this looks like for this child. And so teachers may not, I tell parents this a lot, teachers are not going to fully understand your child. They can do their best, like a gifted educator is going to be able to figure it out, but not in terms of data, not in terms of comparing that child to nuances in their cognitive profile, or, you know, figuring out what kind of strategies are helpful for their memory and their attention. They're just things that we can get from evaluation that are so helpful. So I'm always saying more information is better, but this is one of the things that trips parents up on communication. They don't want to collaborate with this information because they're scared. So if we think this is the pain point for parents, explaining like more information is better completely. So, you know, and I loved this. This is more related to kind of information about daily life, but this was an assistant principal that I loved working with when I was a PTA president. But she said, I believe parents first trust us just by sending their students to us, believing that we will do all we can to help students grow throughout the year. It's always helpful for parents to share information that they feel might impact their child while learning in school. That ranges from expecting a new baby, a move, a change in job, a change in family dynamics, inconsistent bedtimes, any of that. This quote was taken before COVID. I think we can say this is true. I mean, every day is different during COVID. You know, any new thing is going on. So what does communication look like this year? The world is stressed. I mean, when I was writing my slides for this, I thought teachers are stressed, parents are stressed. We are just all, if you think of our emotional capacity as a bucket, you know, our buckets are overflowing, and we have to recognize that. And our kids' buckets are overflowing. And not only that, our resources are depleted. Now, I mentioned that earlier, but it continues to be true. And the hope and the trust that we are always balancing of how long is this going to be, and are our legislatures and our government leaders going to make decisions that, you know, are going to work on the ground? And that's just a big question and a lot of anxiety that teachers are feeling. And as parents, we need to recognize that, you know, we're asked to be doing more than we have the resources for. And we've got to just come together and assume when we see frustration and anxiety, it's because this is just all too much this year. And one of the things that, if you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, definitely look that up, because, you know, Maslow, so we've got to have our safety first. If we don't have our safety, then we can't do the other things. Then we start building relationships. And then all the things that are at the top of the triangle, we're kind of putting on the back burner this year. So things like success, you know, with achieving things and creative ideas and stuff like that, the fluff things in life that are fun and extra, we don't even have the energy for those things this year. And so we really just want to work on focusing on safety and maintaining our relationships. And some learning is going to happen based on that. I've been trying to encourage parents to not get discouraged if their child isn't progressing like they normally are, because I've been calling this COVID school. This is COVID school. I mean, whether you're in person with masks on, because some private and charter schools here are in person with masks, the public schools are going into a phased approach with the youngest children first. And I'm sure we could talk about that at the end of what you're seeing in your state. And so, but even if we're remote learning, none of this is ideal. And I think we all know that. And with the exception of probably some kids with autism and sensory sensitivities that are actually liking being home, or social anxiety, that kids are kind of like, I'm okay with this. Everyone is kind of struggling with this plan. I mean, there are some kids who are doing well, and I think that's helpful to know and will be a silver lining. But overall, COVID and remote learning is shining a pretty big light on any attention weaknesses kids have, any organizational weaknesses they have. You know, I had a child the other day that said, I know when I forget to turn something in because I still have the paper. They said, but I don't remember if I clicked submit, and they have to go through these windows to make sure like it's dated that they clicked submit. And so all of those systems and processes that even kids with just organizational challenges have when there's physical paper and teacher and classroom and desk and supplies is harder now. So again, we just all have to assume everyone is doing their best. So some of these strategies for collaboration are can be implemented this year. Some, of course, can't be implemented this year because of COVID, but just I wanted to share them all just so you could take this into the future of when we're thinking about teachers, parents, administrators, all working together. As I've said before, we have to assume everyone is competently doing their best with the resources they have. If a parent feels like a teacher is not doing their best, it likely means that that teacher needs more training. So I encourage parents to, instead of criticizing that teacher or judging that teacher, reach out to administration and say, I think this teacher might need more training on X, Y, and Z. I'm seeing that they don't quite know this, and I expected that. And so there are collaborative ways to approach administration when we identify a concern. The reverse is also true. So when we're concerned about a parent maybe not always being late or not showing up or something like that, assume they're doing their best and there's something happening in the family life probably that's stopping them from being present. So get curious and try to think, okay, what could be going on? And could I be helpful? Or could I, does this family need to be connected with the school social worker? Things like that. Assume that we don't fully understand the pressure that the other person is under. For teachers, this often goes with, they can't fully tell us everything. With parents, they just may not want to tell us everything. But let's assume that we don't fully understand, and that we don't also understand necessarily all that teachers and administrators are being asked to do with probably not enough resources. You know, I do feel like I have a fly on the wall view of this, having worked in public schools and being involved with the PTA, because I've been in discussions and PTA board meetings where the principal is trying to decide, you know, I've got the money to do this, but I also want to do this. Does the PTA have money to support this? And watching educators be really crafty with how they can fund things is eye-opening, and it gives you so much respect for the fact that everyone is doing the best they can with what they're given. One thing I have seen really helpful is when administrators can figure out which parents in their school community are their best advocates, whether that is someone who believes, you know, in public education, who kind of understands that balance, to then kind of go out and help, whether it's through PTA or just through just more, you know, informal means of saying, hey, this is how we can help the teachers, or this is how we can help the administrators, so that you have a parent voice out there for you. And if you feel like you can be that parent voice for teachers and administrators, do that. You know, say, hey, I see all that you're doing. I'd be happy to be on this committee or do this this thing and help these parents kind of understand how this all works, because that would be really, really helpful as well. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to keep this up while we move into chatting, answering questions, and let's see. Actually, I have to stop sharing, so y'all tell me where we can put that contact info. Should I put it in the chat?
I think the chat would be great. Yeah.
Okay, let me just cut and paste it into the chat, and then that way it can be saved and y'all can have it all. Okay.
Katie, remind me of how much time we have for questions. 15 minutes?
I believe it is 15 minutes. Yes.
We don't have a whole lot of questions, so if you have some, throw them in the chat. But one thing some people are curious about is, how do others build, or do you have any experience on how people build administrative backing for relationships with parents?
In terms, my follow-up, that would be parents getting administrative support or teachers getting administrative support?
I think we could address it from both perspectives.
Both? Okay. So as a parent, I know that my closest relationships being built with administration came through being involved with PTA. Since those systems are set up pretty much across the country in public schools, my first experience with PTA was that our school, my son's special education teacher reached out to me because she knew that the PTA had something called a special education liaison. It was basically a parent who's on the PTA that is just there as a person to kind of filter all the information that's coming through the PTA with that lens in mind. And I was like, oh yes, I can totally do that. So that was my first introduction to PTA. But then I started getting involved more school-wide because I saw just the trust and the respect that was happening from administrators seeing, and we were all working parents that were taking an hour out of it was 1 hour a month where we would go in and figure out how we could basically spend the money that we had raised and how we could support the school on top of the funding that was coming in from the county. In terms of teachers gaining administrative support, I kind of see this more as an administrator to the teacher responsibility. Now, certainly, I'd love to hear anybody who has some stories of what worked best, but I feel like that is something that can best be modeled by administrators, of showing teachers that, supporting their professional development like this, supporting if they want to get training to do a different role in education, just always staying open to if there is a conflict or some sort of problem solving issue that the administrator says, come to me, let's work it out. Because what I was mentioning before about the confidentiality of everything, there is so much teachers can't say to parents in terms of all they've been doing that day. And it's so important for an administrator to help coach and model that for teachers.
Mm-hmm. Those are good points. I'm wondering if you have any strategies for what to do if there's been a rift in the relationship, or if there's already been a breakdown in relationships. How can we build back that trust?
Yeah, I think that if trust is broken, it's often helpful to just name it and to apologize and say, these were some of the constraints I was under when I said that or when I expected that. And I'm seeing now that that was overwhelming for you when I said that. Or, maybe it is a parent saying, okay, I need more information about what this teacher is expecting me to do, or vice versa, what this parent is expecting the teacher to do. And sometimes that is talking to other parent friends if you're not quite clear on your role. Sometimes for teachers, it's talking to the administration about what should I, how far should I go in terms of repairing this relationship? But it is so important because nothing else can happen successfully without that. I do think sometimes that parents feel that they don't trust the competence if they've seen like one thing that they didn't like, or if they feel parents are driven from such an emotional place, if they feel like their child was misunderstood. And so if you're seeing that as a teacher, and you think it's a breakdown in trust because the parent is perceiving that you don't kind of get their child, think about what you can do to educate yourself on a certain issue or get more training and show the parent what you're doing to keep learning and growing, because sometimes that's a common breakdown in the trust of a parent-teacher relationship.
Yeah, those are good. Those are good ideas. Thank you. This is a question that I have, actually. I see this dynamic often, especially for students who maybe are really good at masking their difficulties in school, or they hold it together all day and then they go home and they fall apart.
Mhm.
Parents sharing their concerns, staff saying, oh, all kids do that, or, oh, he doesn't really stand out in class. And then there becomes this human nature tug where the parents feel dismissed, the school staff isn't really seeing what the parents are seeing, and there's this constant battle from the, especially, and even as a parent, my own daughter has chronic pain, which oftentimes the school does not see. It's an invisible chronic illness. And I'm always feeling like I have to prove like, if you feel dismissed, you become, you have a stronger sense of having to prove your point of view. And so then, I mean, I've sat in endless meetings, and then it started happening to me where I started observing, you know, this relationship where the school is saying, oh, he doesn't really stand out that badly, or he's doing really well, or we don't see that at school, and parents becoming insistent. No, I see this. This is a real problem. This is a real difficulty. How do you break that cycle?
Right. And so in my role as a child psychologist, I can help parents understand this if I'm also working with them. But I think it's helpful to validate for the parent to say, for the teacher to say to the parent, I absolutely believe you that this is what your child looks like in the afternoon when they're tired, after they've held it together all day. I want you to trust me that they apparently have the energy to be successful in the classroom. There's something about this, maybe it's the structure, the predictability of the classroom. And the opposite is true as well. So it tends to be more neurotypical anxious kids that will hold it together all day, and they don't want to get embarrassed, and they don't want to go to the principal's office, and they don't want to, they don't want anyone to notice them. So they hold it together and they're exhausted by the end of the day, and they just let it loose. The opposite can be true where a child with autism or sensory sensitivities is completely triggered all day long by the noise, the crowds, the transitions of a school building. And then they go home and we see none of it. And so we just have to get curious about why. There's a reason. So instead of invalidating and saying, I don't know why they're doing that, they don't do that here, that's data. If they're not doing it at home, why? Or if they are successful in one setting over the other, let's figure out why. And so I think that we can get curious and talk that through, validating that both situations are true. We trust that both situations are true. And let's figure out, what is that child getting in whatever situation it's in where they're successful, and how can we replicate that? So this comes back to one of my most passionate points, which is, let's stop solving problems and let's start with what's working and how can we make it happen everywhere.
Okay. Great, thank you. And you're so, just by validating alone, I think we can start to break that cycle that happens so often. Another question we had are there any specific strategies that you use to try to help parents feel more like equal members of the IEP team? Yeah,
and I actually see a point from Timothy here that speaks just to that, is we have to come to the table humble and saying, we don't know everything. And that helps all of us feel like an equal member, because it makes other people feel like they have something to offer. It makes the parent feel like they have something to offer. So if we all are assuming everyone's doing the best they can with the resources they're given, we're assuming that everyone's the expert in their little setting, home child, school child, version of child, in this classroom versus that classroom. Children, can look very different in different classes at school too. So if we all just honor that that person is the expert on that child in that setting, it helps it be more of a collaboration and less of a let's sit down and we'll tell you how the child is doing, which I know it can feel like that because there are maybe 5 school members and 1 parent at the table. And so just by how we place each other at the IEP table can be helpful. I always think it's helpful to put the parent next to the person taking minutes so that it feels like they're kind of close to being, you know, an expert, because that's kind of the person everyone looks to is like, make sure this is in there. And so just assuming that we all have a piece of the puzzle to come in with can help with that.
Okay, great. Any more questions for Dr. Emily King? Oh, any ideas for teachers for self-care and parents, especially at this time where we're trying to feel safe?
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to just start at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is making sure we are, as adults, we are getting enough rest and we are getting enough socialization, whatever that looks like for us. For some people, it's 1 friend a week. For some people, it is lots of digital communication with friends. That we're eating well, that if we can, you know, that we're drinking lots of water, that we are getting some exercise, getting out in the sunshine, especially as this goes into winter months, of making sure we're getting all of those body needs, all those physical needs that we know promote just mood health in terms of vitamin D and fresh air and adrenaline and exercise. And then also that we are reaching out for help more often. So go ahead and don't wait until you feel like maybe once you'll try to handle it yourself, but the minute you start to feel stressed about something, go and reach out for help. And this is everyone's threshold for that. And when I say help, it could be asking a colleague, it could be asking an administrator, it could be going to therapy for yourself. You know, those are all things that we have to decide as adults. And whether we're a teacher or a parent, we have to feel strong so that we can then entertain all of these problems we're solving every day. And I think too, knowing that just like the anxious child that's holding it together all day and then falls apart at the end of the school day, that's true of adults sometimes. We may be holding it together at work and we may need to carve out some sort of hour in our day or 30 minutes in our day where we can refuel our tanks emotionally with whatever that looks like. One thing I'm also thinking of that's been helpful for some kids is the power of scheduling joyful activities, which sounds so ridiculous, but the reason it's so great is, first of all, we all find joy in different things. So when I'm talking to parents about noticing maybe what your kid is missing, maybe what just, you know, I miss live music. I just miss it so much. You know, that's just something that speaks to me. And, you know, how can we schedule you know, watching videos of live music perhaps, or how can we schedule those things? The reason it's so important to schedule them is we don't just get the joy from doing the thing. We also get the positive anticipation of looking forward to the thing. There's so much that was in our daily life before this that was that just happened because of moving around the community. And when we're not doing that, you know, I've had kids that say, we don't even like chit chat anymore. We just get on the call and we do the thing and then we're done. And it's true for all of us. You know, I think we all miss talking about our favorite show or, you know, talking about whatever, you know, that's just kind of small talk. And those are some transition moments that are good for our mental health because it makes us feel connected and not alone. And so we're missing all of that. And also scheduling some of these things for our kids with maybe trusted adults outside the family, like aunts and uncles and grandparents or coaches, you know, even if it's a Zoom call with some of these people, because kids are kind of sick of us as parents and they want to see other adults. And I think that's one of the things, I don't know about you, but I almost felt emotional when I first heard my children's teachers on Zoom back in September. I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. And all that they had prepared for the fall. It was great.
Yeah. And I want to bring it back to what Mona Delahook said too, to parents, to trust your instinct. I think as a society, we've been taught to question our own gut feeling and our own instincts. And as parents, we have really good gut feelings about what about our children and about what they need. And we have to be able to trust those when we come to the table at an IEP meeting. And unfortunately, as we've grown through, we've just been taught, and it's almost been reinforced, to question that gut instinct. And I think a parent's gut instinct can be so right on and accurate in so many ways.
And for administrators and teachers and any educators to also trust that parent's gut instinct. And if it's different from our gut instinct as an educator, there's a reason for that. It's because our experiences with that child have been different. So why? Why are our experiences different?
I have to say, Dr. King, I completely agree with that. As an autistic adult, I actually, I've been visiting a naturopathic holistic doctor of Native American descent, and one of the things she talks about all the time in our medical visits, she has seen a good number of her patients are physically ill because they're in situations society placed them where they have to curb their gut instincts. And I remember having a nice debate with Kelly Mahler. Do you know that name, Dr. Kelly Mahler? She is a person who talks about, the interoceptive system, which is another form of gut instincts. And I've told, and Kelly Mahler has these whole talks about how autistic people can't listen to their gut instincts. And I literally went up, when I was time for questions, raised my hand and said, look, Dr. Mahler, you call this an autistic deficit? Why don't I teach you awareness of all the times autistic people have to ignore their gut instincts just to function in the very educational settings where you're claiming they are deficient in that interoception? And she thanked me profusely for teaching that awareness.
I feel kind of the same way, kind of like I knew.
So thank you very much with what you just said.
Good news mission.
Thank you, James.
You're so welcome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Anybody have any other questions? Tim, do you want to take it, or Katie? Thank you.
I think this one's mine. Thank you so much, Emily. That was fantastic, and all the way from North Carolina. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. That was really, part of my heart is building those relationships with parents, educators, parents and physicians, parents and their care team. Is, Mona mentioned earlier that it all goes back to relationships. And the better the quality of the relationships, the better the quality of the outcomes. There's just no way around it. Doesn't matter what the intervention is. If you don't have that solid relationship, you're not going to get the best outcome. And we know we want the best for our kids, whether we're educators. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
You're so welcome.
Bye-bye.